I'm here to enhance life about the chief operator. Let the Wi-Fi do its thing here. This is a topic that has always been kind of close to my heart because I've seen a lot of stations over the years not following or not understanding what needs to be done for a chief operator. And if it'll start to show, actually. Oh, come on. Doesn't want to start to show. It may be. I'll give it a few minutes there. If not, I'll click through the other way. Anyhow, my name is John Hartmeyer. For those that don't know me, I grew up in Zanesville. Actually, I learned television and radio when I was yay high. My dad was chief operator or chief engineer at Wiz for 54 years. He was there plus. So I grew up in the business. I've been very passionate about radio and television both. Especially the engineering side. Right now I'm working as a sales engineer for Summit Technology Group. Our main office is in Kego Harbor, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, one of the suburbs, and we have engineers in offices throughout the U.S. We do a lot of consulting work, we do a lot of contract work, well, not really contract, but station builds, transmitter sales, things like that. And as I've gotten older, it's become more of a necessity for me to have more office time than spending it out on the road a lot. Oh, let's see if this thing's updated yet. No, it hasn't. We'll just do it this way for now. So duties of a chief operator. There's a lot of confusion with station owners, station managers especially, about what's required of the chief operator. Chief operator isn't necessarily a technical person. That's not the person that's going to fix the transmitter necessarily. It depends on your station, on your chief operator's knowledge, what their skill set is. It very well may be the engineer at the station. For some stations, it could be a contract person if it falls in certain parameters, which I'll get into here in a minute. CFR is pretty straightforward about what's required, what's not required of a chief operator. The end result, that's what we want to avoid. No station needs off-air time. If things are done properly by the chief operator, hopefully, this can be avoided. Things can be found ahead of time. There can be problems located before it becomes a major problem, such as that, taking you off the air, which you don't want. According to the CFR and Part 73, broadcast station must designate a person to serve as chief operator, and there should be another person designated as the acting chief operator on a temporary basis. What's that? Well, I'm the chief operator of station WJON, and I'm out of town, or I'm out of state, or I'm on vacation, what have you. Then Blake may be the listed alternate chief operator, or somebody needs to be listed as an alternate. There has to be more than one person listed, somebody to fill the duties. There are several things that need to be done, but somebody's got to be listed with it. Who qualifies to be a chief operator? That's always a big question, especially with smaller market stations. That person must be an employee of the station if it's an AM station that uses a directional antenna array, or if it's above 10 kilowatt. So that person has to be an employee of the station. Also, if it's a TV station, that person needs to be an employee of the station. The time that's needed, though, is going to be up to what's required to keep the station in compliance, keep them in tolerance, keep them operating legally, making sure the logs are done right, making sure EASs and all that fun stuff, and we'll dive into some of that here in a few minutes. But if you've got an AM directional, doesn't matter if it's a 2 kilowatt directional, it has to be an employee of the station. It cannot be a contract person. If it's above 10 kilowatt on AM, it has to be an employee of the station. Non-directional stations, AM stations below 10 kilowatt, FM station, it can be a contract person, it can be an employee. One station I did work for about 10 years ago, I was doing some contract work for a gentleman. He had 3 stations, an AM FM combo in one town and an FM in a nearby town. His evening DJ was designated as the chief operator of all 3 of those stations. He had kind of a tech savvy, he wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a nuts and bolts guy, but he kind of had the tech savvy background. So he understood, you know, what was required out of logs. He understood meter readings. He understood, you know, parameters that had to be followed. So he was a good choice. For a contract engineer to do it, it depends on the arrangement with the station. Personally, if you have a larger firm, I would not, you know, a firm like ours, I would not recommend because of cost. For a larger firm to do that, it's going to be quite the cost for them to be, you know, saying that you're in compliance or this or that, because it's going to be a lot of visits to the station. It's going to be very costly. But you could have a firm like us, for example, or DNAV or whoever, as a consultant, you know, for that chief operator or whoever it is designated to the station, for them to go to or ask questions or what have you. So, you know, you kind of have to be a little picky on who you're going to get, who's going to fill that role, who the best person is to fill that role. The designation of the chief operator, it needs to be in writing. It needs to be posted as a control point. On that same piece of paper, the alternate needs to be listed. One station I was at for years full time, you know, so-and-so is listed as chief operator. In his absence, you know, Mr. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so will fill the duties of the chief operator. It needs posted at the control point. Do they require that still to transmitter site as well, Blake? I wasn't sure on the new ABA. Okay, it's not required at transmitter site, but it is required at the control point. If the person is doing it as a contract, falls in the parameters where it's a contract person and non-employee of the station, it needs to be in writing, once again, still at the control point, but there needs to be a copy of that in station files. That, hey, Joe Schmo, contractor, is designated as our chief operator, you know. It needs to be in the station file so that that can be accessed as well.
So as far as is that online public file, in other words, or in other words, a station file, everything we've got is up on, you know, the FCC's website.
Blake, you might actually know that one.
It can be online, but it has to be available at the station too. So you need a local copy, but you can't put it online in like other documents.
Okay. And the reason I yielded to Blake is he does the inspections. He knows where he's looking, but also they've kind of changed that around a little bit because of the deregulation of station logs, of meter readings, things like that. You know, they've kind of made it a little more look here, look here, look here kind of thing, you know. So I thought it yielded the expert that knew where he was looking at when he was doing inspections. But that does need to be designated in writing. What are the responsibilities for this person? Review the station records at least once a week to determine that the entries are being made correctly. Back in the day, when I was coming up in the business, we did meter readings every hour. Every hour, on the hour, you did meter readings. You know, if you designated a quarter till, that's when your station did it, that's when you did it. Then it all changed to kind of like every 3 hours. Then solid state came along. With solid state came a lot of IP connectivity. And we're able to take all the control out of the person's hands now. We can handle it all inside our GUI, inside the transmitter itself. whatever system you're using, you know, some people want some sort of a reading once a shift, once a day, you know, whatever your parameters are that works for your station and your equipment. Just make sure that that's being reviewed, number one. Number two, make sure it's by a person that is active with the station, especially if you're using the GUI to send out alarms or notifications, or you're using one of the new Burkhart solos, you know, that can email when there's a problem, when you're low power, above power, what have you. Make sure that person is on record with the station, is still active with the station. We had a public station we was working with a couple months ago that, oh yeah, if we get a transmitter alarm, it email so-and-so. Well, so-and-so hadn't shown up at the station in 6 years. Not sure what good that was going to do them. They didn't stay current with any of their settings, you know, something that was very simple. Change an email address basically in their remote or their transmitter system. I forget which one of the two it was, but you know, something as simple as changing an email. But that's how important that can be. You're talking about a person that if they can get that email and they have access to your system, and let's say it's a disgruntled person that left, do you want that person to have control of your transmitter system or your air chain? No. So, you know, make sure it's current, make sure that all tracks up. Other things that the person is responsible for, FCC compliance, maintain station logs. So we were talking, what's in the station log anymore? Well, EAS first and foremost. The government is very, very particular that they want the EAS records of what your EAS unit is doing, make sure it's receiving from the LP1, LP2, make sure it's getting the CAP requirements, you know, for your area, make sure that, you know, it's getting everything required, make sure that you are sending, make sure that there's no pattern in how you're sending. All this needs to be logged. Most of the EAS units now, you know, do a fairly good job. You know, like us, for example, we actually have an EAS compliance piece where we can actually remote in, and we take care of that for some stations that we do, a couple commercial stations, a couple of non-coms both, that don't have active staff, you know, to really be watching the EAS logs or understand what they're looking at. So there are services, but you know, that is first and foremost for station log is EAS. Any out-of-station parameters. You're running at reduced power. You know, you've got this beautiful solid-state transmitter and it just blew half the PAs. So you're running at 50% power. That needs to be recorded in the station log. Hey, we're running at reduced power at this date at this time due to this reason. You know, also when you get restored, that needs to be entered into a station log. Hey, this was restored, you know, whatever the date is 3 days later, Engineer Joe Schmo put in 3 new PAs or whatever. But things like that need to be logged. Any other abnormalities that can or may affect your signal or your operating parameters between legal and not legal need to be logged. Now, once again, when it comes to the transmitter readings, things like that, that's your own preference. That's going to depend on the equipment that you have. I worked with a station last week. They're still running as a main transmitter on their big 50 kilowatt FM and 816R Continental. He knows he's going to replace it at some point with solid state, but he said it's sitting here running fine. I've got 2 spare tubes for it that are ready to go. Why do I want to change it? I couldn't really argue with man. I mean, you know, it's his money. First thing I'd be looking at changing is A, because of parts availability, B, tube availability, and C, the power bill that it's costing me every month. But that's me. He's perfectly fine. You know, on the other side of town, he's got a smaller FM and he's all solid state, and he's happy with both. But those 2 sites require a lot different set of eyes on them, maintaining the tube, maintaining, the tube type transmitter. It's going to be more sensitive than maintaining the solid state that's going to sit there and do its thing. It's going to sit there and run. Monitoring station performance. And this could be kind of aimed at programming a little bit if you want, but monitoring your on-air sound if you're a radio station. Monitoring the visual quality if you're a television station and sound. But, and I know there's recordings out there, and one of the big things in the early 2000s was some artists thought it was great to record distorted sounding vocals in with their music. I was working at an AM/FM combo, and the first time I heard one of those, I was driving into work, and I about wrecked my truck on the way. I'm going, why do we sound so bad all of a sudden? And then that song ends, the next one comes on, and it sounds great again, and I'm like, and they're playing them off a CD, and it turned out that's just the way the artist had it recorded. But that aside, that's why I made the comment about programming, but monitoring your station, especially radio, for the sound quality. Make sure it doesn't sound all distorted. Make sure it's not being caused because something's out of parameter with the transmitter, something's whopper-jaw with the processing or the STL link or, anything else. That is part of the chief operator's duty, is to monitor the station. Ensuring EAS readiness, I talked a lot about, EAS logging, but any error with an EAS unit needs to be logged. If you've gone through 6 months and you haven't missed receiving a test and you haven't missed sending a test, and that's great. And all of a sudden, the first week after that 6 months, you miss the weekly test from your LP1. Is it time to hit the panic button? Not necessarily. But that information needs to be logged, that it wasn't there. Now, if it's my station and next week rolls around and it's not there, hey, I got definitely more of a problem than I thought, with my receiver, with something, with programming, with, somewhere in the unit. Very likely they may have missed it. It doesn't matter, it still needs to be logged, it still needs to be taken care of. And once again, that's where, like, with us, with our EAS compliance, where, we come in where some of these guys are saying, they can't be there, the babysitter signals that's 90 miles away from where they're at, and things like that. Let's see here. Equipment maintenance. It doesn't mean that the person is the one that's going to be maintaining the equipment. A lot of smaller stations, the GM is listed as the chief operator, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The GM's met with somebody, knows what they're looking for, knows what they do, know what the requirements are, but that person needs to spearhead that the maintenance is being done. Whether it's required maintenance, whether it's emergency maintenance, but that's the person that should be leading the charge to make sure that that repair is done. Station that doesn't have an engineer, somebody that can dig in and work on the voltages and stuff, then that's somebody that needs to call one of the firms. Call somebody in, if they, especially with an off-air, but if they've got major problems. Once again, the chief operator doesn't have to be the person to be able to fix it, they just have to facilitate being able to fix it. This person also can supervise the engineers and technicians. Now, everybody in this room that's an engineer does not like the station owner looking over their shoulder while they're reaching in the high voltage and working on this, working on that. I don't think I'd find 5 people in the US that would like that. But the supervising doesn't mean, standing there over the shoulder, staring them down. It means, keeping track on what's going on, keeping updated on what's going on, what progress is being made or not made, helping facilitate, oh, wow, we need to talk to the factory about this because this is really, a person to help facilitate those things. Sometimes, you know, stations have like one main engineer and they have 2 technicians that are up and coming working for them. Well, maybe the chief engineer is out of town or out of state, and it's the technician that you've got in there working on this problem. You've never really seen anything like this. What do I do? You know, once again, that's where you can put them in touch with, or help put them in touch with factory, with an engineering firm, with somebody with knowledge, you know, to help them or help guide them or hire them in. This person also needs to be able to do routine inspections. An inspection doesn't mean sitting down and meters look great, okay, fine. No, it means actually inspecting the station. If your transmitter is located with your studio, it's a lot easier for that person to be able to do the inspection to see what's going on, you know, from the air chain all the way to the tower. A lot of stations have remote sites, television, radio alike. Somebody needs to be out at these remote sites on a regular basis, doing an inspection. Hey, copper thieves tried to break in and steal copper. Hey, did this person, you know, forget to lock up last time they were there? You know, simple things like that to very complex. I had a FM station when I was doing contract work several years ago. They called me and said, oh my God, the right channel's not on the air at all. We've only got left channel on the air. And we checked, it's leaving the studio site. So I went straight to the transmitter site. I got there, and the person they leased the field off of wasn't happy. It wasn't that they didn't pay, they did, but wasn't happy that the tower was there because he was a new property owner and he didn't like the fact that he inherited this lease. So he put his own set of locks on things, so I couldn't get in. Well, there was a guy in the area that worked for one of the home electric companies doing, you know, residential electric, and he was kind of like on loan to the station when needed. If, you know, it was something simple, I could call and say, hey, Buzz, hey, can you go check? Oh, yeah, I reset the plate breaker, transmitter's back on, you know, whatever. He also happened to be the volunteer fire chief. I called him and I said, I got a problem. He said, be there in 15 minutes. He came out, cut the lock off. He said, I deemed it as a fire emergency. I wasn't going to argue with the man. I mean, you know, he got me in. But things like that, you know, is another reason why to have routine inspections, even when you think everything's going right, but for whatever reason it's not going right. And then inspecting the equipment itself, making sure it's clean, making sure filters are clean to the building. You know, that there's not 400 rodents that's decided to make a home inside your transmitter building because it's fall and it's getting cold outside. You know, whatever reason, but you do need to lay eyes on things and see and make sure that things are operating properly. So routine inspections are hugely important.
What do you constitute as routine? Weekly, monthly, quarterly?
Once again, it depends on the operation. I'm old school, so I like weekly, personally, but I know some folks that do it bi-weekly. I know some folks that probably are not sure where their transmitter site's located. And that's no joke. That is no joke. I mean, well, where's your transmitter? Well, I said it's out on Route 4 somewhere. It happens, folks. It really does. It's unbelievable, but it does happen. You know, that's a person that probably just calls a contract guy. He's probably not following the law anyhow. And he just calls a contract guy, you know, when nobody can hear a station or see a station. But no, I personally like weekly or bi-weekly, and especially with the newer solid state, what you can get with, once again, the web control GUIs built into the transmitters, or you know, through like Berkeley remotes now, what you have access to be able to sit there with your Windows 10, Windows 11 computer, log in, and you're looking at everything the transmitter is looking at. is probably not as important to be there weekly or bi-weekly, but on the same token, that's still not visual. Now, one thing some guys have done, they have added security cameras outside and inside their transmitter buildings. So I've seen them where they've had it just covering the doorway. There's one door in, one door out, and they've covered just both sides of that doorway. But I've seen it where guys have set up another camera that's focused in on the front panel meter readings for transmitters still got meters, or focused in on the GUI so they can see if there's an alarm flashing on that GUI because they couldn't get logged in because of an internet outage. Then they add in things like, other than fire alarm, they can add in temperature alarms. They can add in, you know, all sorts of things on these security systems as possible. And the manufacturers, you know, Burke, Nautel, et cetera, I mean, they'll help you with, you know, getting set up with something like that. But that can be a very valuable tool, especially if you don't have the station staff, you don't have the folks that can run out to these sites all the time. Once again, you know, the solid state has made it easier, and it's made it harder at the same time. Because with the solid state, it doesn't need as much TLC, it doesn't need as much loving, you know, it doesn't need that real personal touch every week, you know, retuning the plate and the grid and all that fun stuff. But on the same token, because it doesn't need all that, it's kind of like forgotten about. So, you know, it's going to depend on what your needs are, where you're located, you know, versus your transmitter site. And once again, that's where, you know, you may want to get a hold of a firm, you know, to talk to them, to get their idea. Hey, this is what I got. What do you think? You know, or talk to the guy or the gal that you have that does your contract work and say, you know, I know you're not listed my chief operator, but how often should I be looking at this thing? You know, they keep it operating legally. They keep it normally. Something else that falls under the chief operator, believe it or not, is the public inspection file. Now, I know a lot of engineers that don't really fool with the public inspection file, especially with the online, and with the EEO requirement reporting this needs to be done. They do their section with the ETRS and the DERS reporting and things like that, and then say, it's on management's part to do this other. But still, technically, according to the CFR rules, that chief operator is responsible. So even if the chief operator doesn't know how to file this report for the non-com, or doesn't know how to file this EEO report for the hiring cycle or whatever, still needs to verify that it has been updated, that it is up to date, correct, all that fun stuff. Ensuring proper maintenance and availability, and I know I've kind of danced around that for a while, but this person needs to make sure that the stuff is actually getting done. Yeah, I called Joe, he did some work for me last year, and he said he'd make it out there, and it's a week later, and he still hasn't made it out there, and you're still operating illegally. That actually comes back on you as the chief operator. You're not doing anything to mitigate getting this situation taken care of. You need to take the lead as the chief operator to make sure things are getting done. Like I say, it doesn't necessarily mean you know how to fix it, but you need to know who you need to call or who you need to light a fire under their hiney or whatever to get something done. Or if that person's not getting it done, well, I've got to call somebody else. That goes with both physical and online. Like we talked about, public inspection files. Anything else that's going online, you know, for the station, records-wise. It shouldn't be, but like we've been getting in a lot lately at Summit with our streaming platform, and we just made a major update to it. One of the things that we did, which doesn't fall under a chief operator, but it does, is our new streaming platform auto-generates reports for sound exchange. So the program director or the music director or whoever doesn't have to sit there and do those monthly reports for sound exchange anymore. Yeah, that's not under chief operator, but it is, because who usually ends up with it? A lot of stations, the chief operator, oh, well, you're already doing all these filings. Here, you do this. Oh, here's another pile of stuff for you to do. You know, so is it in the CFR that chief operator does the music reporting? No. But more times than not, and several that I've talked to have gotten that burden. And so, you know, what we did was try to make it easier for the person to do the reporting, to take care of those things. But it's little things like that that'll get you with, you know, all the things that you don't think about with the operation of the station. You know, as the chief operator, the person that has to make sure that the yearly FCC bill gets paid, that, well, their system crashed 2 weeks ago and they couldn't get paid on time. No, it's not that person's responsibility, but needs to be working with, you know, whoever it is to let them know, hey, this just came down from the FCC, you know, there's a delay of 2 weeks. Hey, you know, this just came down. For us, since we have clients all throughout the country, we keep an eye on when DERS reporting comes off. We actually get an alert email every time, like on this last hurricane. We was getting the alert emails direct from the FCC on what counties were affected in what states. And so, fun for me, I got to sit there every time. Okay, let's see, I got somebody in this county, it's not listed. Well, I don't have anybody in this county in North Carolina, so I'm okay here. You know, but I had to dig through. Once again, that may be something that the chief operator needs to be able to handle, you know, is taken care of. Right now, DERS is voluntary. I look for it to be mandatory very soon, once again. What's your take on it, Blake, or what have you heard?
That's what it looks like they're heading,
Yeah.
especially with all the problems we have with coming through the hurricane country, everybody.
Yeah.
So they're going to try to make it mandatory, but then you also have, nobody can report because there's no cell service.
Right. Right. It's the whole catch-22 thing that they've got to figure out. But these are things that all are going to fall back toward the chief operator. That chief operator is supposed to, like I say, not necessarily know how to fix the situation, but needs to know and understand how to deal with the situation. Whether it be DERS reporting, whether it be public file, whether it be EAS logging, transmitter readings, what have you, whatever it takes. The number of hours that's required for a chief operator, CFR designates it as whatever is necessary to maintain legal operation. So for your operation, that may require 5 hours a week. For yours, it may require 10. For yours, it may require somebody every once a week. You know, it's going to be different depending on what your needs are, what your demands are, what your wants are. But that's how they have it designated in the CFR right now, that whatever time is needed. And that's listed the same both for if it's an employee of the station or if it's a contract person. Once again, if you're using a contract person, I would shy away from any of the bigger firms like ours, for example, or the DNAVs or whatever of the world, simply because it's not going to be a cost-effective solution for the station. Even the station's rolling in cash, it's not going to be very cost-effective because of the requirements. You're asking somebody to put their neck on the line, you know, for verifying this, and this. Rates aren't cheap anymore. It used to be, you know, 30 years ago, you pick up the phone and it was the good old boy network, you know, that you could call Joe or Fred or whoever. Hey, I know you had this kind of box before. What kind of problem did you have? Because I'm having it, you know, and get the curbside consult. That's something else that a lot of the newer digital solid state devices have taken away, because it's gotten down to, instead of a component level repair of a transmitter, it's a board repair or it's a module you know, that you're changing out. You're not going in and troubleshooting past, oh, well, it's this PA. Okay, here's a new one. You know, it doesn't take, sometimes on some of the boxes, it doesn't take a lot of skill to do that. Sometimes it does, depending on the box and depending on where it's mounted and how, if it's hot pluggable, if it's not hot pluggable. And once again, there your demands on chief operator at that point. Does this person actually understand the difference? Should this person actually be doing it, or should this person be, oh no, there's a problem, get on the phone to somebody? That's why it gets to be very, very important. And anybody that knows me knows that I've got a big alliance to safety. I was in the volunteer fire. Now I'm still a certified paramedic in Ohio, even though I don't run anymore. But safety has always been something that I've been very passionate about. You know, I tell people, don't work alone. Well, how many of us work alone a lot of times on high voltage? Yep, we do. That's who we are. You know, do I try to make sure there's somebody else there? Yeah. Sometimes is it possible? No. But end result, we want, well, I should say we, but I want everybody to be safe about it. I don't want, and one of the reasons this talk was a little bit passionate for me, I don't want somebody that doesn't understand or doesn't know, that is not an engineer. I don't want that person going out to the transmitter and starting to plug and play with modules, or, you know, well, the factory said I should see this if I put test leads here. If the person doesn't know, if the person's not trained for that, the person shouldn't be doing it. Case in point, I had a small FM Class A that I did some contract work for a couple years ago, well, several years ago. And they had appointed this kid, he was 19 years old, made him chief operator. The reason they made him chief operator is because he had taken interest in our side of the business, the engineering side of the business, and I kind of he shadowed with me a little bit his last year of high school and getting ready for school. Well, he calls me one night. I'd already left that station. I just did occasional work for him. He called me one night and said, yeah, well, Station X is off the air, and they told me to take readings on the B plus side of the power supply that feeds the tube. And I've got to back off the transmitter, and I'm reaching down in under, and I need to know about the test points. What do I do next? I said, get out of it, close it back up, tell the owner to call somebody that's qualified. You have no business, because that particular transmitter ran about 6,000 volts of DC at about 3 amps when it was at full power. There was a lot of potential there. Real good potential for him to not be there anymore. As a chief operator, yeah, he knew what he was doing. As an engineer, he had not been through the schooling yet. He didn't know, you know, he's still learning. But that's why this subject is kind of passionate to me, because I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody to be able to go home at night to their family or to their dog or to their cat or whatever. You know, everybody needs to be able to go home at night. But we need to make sure we're doing it the right way also. You know, like I said, the compliance reporting, there's different aspects to compliance. You know, to make sure the reporting is done, like I said, with the DERS voluntary right now, I fully expect them to be mandatory. ETRS 1, 2, and 3 for the EAS filings. You know, quarterly reports for the commercial stations. The quarterly PSA report, or semi-annual, I forget which, for the non-com stations. You know, no matter what environment you're working for or doing the work for, you need to make sure that you are making sure that all the compliance things are being done and filed and taken care of. The chief operator should be the one, or at least be involved with submitting FCC filings. Now, once again, this person may not be an engineer, and there had to be engineering studies for directional FM antenna, and there had to be, engineering studies done to determine the amount of power for this type of antenna and this transmitter at this location at this height, and, above sea level and all this. No, that's not something the chief operator is going to know, but the chief operator should be involved with this contract service to make sure that the filing is being done and the station part of the compliance is being filled out correctly, and then those addendums are being added into it. Just like when you're doing a bid, you've got to have this, and this, when you bid on something. It's the same thing when you're filing with the FCC. You got to have this, and this, or the FCC thumbs their nose at it. Sorry, it's not. So, monitor and adjust power levels as needed. The old days, there was usually an adjustment on tube transmitter to bring your power level up or down to keep it in the parameters. Then they came along with automatic power controls that would keep you within 4% of a set point. So theoretically, you stayed between 98 and 102% on an FM, or whatever your base current was for the AM, TV, staying in that 98 to 102. Then solid state came along and started being able to do a lot of it for you. Once again, it's paying attention to that GUI, paying attention to that transmitter control. What is it telling you? It's not asking you to be the end-all, do-all, guru of all the answers, but it's sitting there saying, hey, I was told to tell you when something's wrong. Something's wrong, do something about it. You need to be responsive to this. You need to be responsive when there's issues at the station. You can actually be a go-between between the techs, the engineers that come in, an engineering firm that comes in. You've got Summit coming in to do this transmitter work or whatever, and they're in town for the next 3 weeks. Well, hey, we're out of parameter. Now, as a chief operator, that's your business to be responsive between Summit and your station management of what can be done. So being a go-between. Monitor operating hours. There are minimum requirements for operating hours of a station. Are you meeting that? In today's world, most TV, most radio stations are 24 hours a day. Not. You still got a lot of AMs that have daytime power, nighttime power, or they have critical hour powers. 1 AM I was working with last week, 500 watt day, 250 watt critical hour, 2 watt nighttime power. A lot of people ask why. Well, as I went down their license when I was researching the info on it, it was very obvious they had a 250 watt translator on FM. So as long as they was keeping that AM on, even at that little old 2 watts a night, they could do whatever with their FM translator to keep them, which is what they were focusing on. They wasn't even focusing on the AM frequency. They're not even advertising their AM frequency, but they still need to keep it within legal operating parameters. Once again, that goes back to logging, that goes back to the chief operator to make sure that these times are being changed. Because if for those that's never dealt with that with an AM, with power changes, the times change monthly. So some of the newer transmitters have either 3 or 5 settings that you program it, and hopefully it'll never get erased and it'll go through it when the installer sets it up and everything's good. There's still a lot of people using the older AM transmitters because, once again, they're more focused with their FM translator that they have on the air for the AM. So they're kind of forgetting about this AM component. The AM component is still very important. I mean, we've all been watching the legal of what's been going on in Washington, D.C. and about the AM and Every Vehicle Act. You know, and it looks like that's going to go through and be passed. You know, I grew up, I remember as a little kid in Zanesville with a shortwave receiver. It used to be my grandfather's. It was an old national corporation from the 40s that I'd actually asked was one of the first things that I revamped and made work again. Well, I had the AM band on. I built a long wire antenna outside of my bedroom window. And at night I was listening to WLS out of Chicago. That was a big thrill for me at 9 years old. You know, AM is still important, but once again, it's one of those forgotten things, especially the chief operator, when you got the station management that's saying, hey, we're concentrated at 100.9, we don't care about 1500, you know. But it's still very legal, it's still a very big part of what you're doing. Maintaining transmitter and studio operations, and I know we've talked about this, or I've talked about it at least. But once again, it comes back to what is required. You know, everybody's site's different. It would be nice if everybody's site was the same, then when they call me at Summit and say, hey, I've got a problem, oh yeah, go to wiring block 5, go to here, you know, oh yeah, that's an easy, I can't do that. It would be nice if I could, but I can't. So that's where, you know, every site is different. Hopefully you know what's needed to maintain that. If you don't, get somebody in there to help you evaluate and find out what's needed. Well. Reporting violations. You have violations. What's one of the very first violations somebody can think of that needs to be reported right away? Tower lights. Technically, you've got 30 minutes to report when your tower lights are out. And it's not necessarily the FCC that's going to come after you first, it's the FAA. You think the FCC is a pain to deal with? I remember reporting a side light out. One side light, it was a tower, 400-foot tower I took care of, site that I took care of. Had 2 beacons, top beacon, middle beacon, had 2 sets of side lights. It was a self-supporting tower, so there was 3 side lights at each level. One of those 3 had went out on the lowest level of side light. As a good boy, I reported it to the FAA. Fine, no problem, they took the information, they documented it. Hey, this is great, all's happy. Well, then bad weather hit. Trying to get my tower guy to go up in bad weather to change one of the lower side lights when it was still technically visible 360 degrees because it was a self-supporting tower the way it was lit. That didn't go quite well because I got a phone call 15 days later going, well, you've now been reported to the FCC because you're in violation of such. Huh? What? You know, I had the deer in the headlight look. They didn't care that there was bad weather. They didn't care that things were still visible. They cared about this light still being reported as out. I know a guy that reported a light back in service 3 days after it was out, a mid-beacon. Well, somebody didn't input it right at the FAA end of it. He got the phone call 15 days later. Well, you're in violation. No, I'm not. Yeah. So that's where the chief operator does come in to play, once again, to mitigate between these 2 entities. You know, the repair that's taken place and to make sure it's been reported properly. The repair has been reported properly. Other violations, you know, like I talked about earlier with the underpower. You know, because you blew half the PAs in your transmitter because of the lightning strike last night. You know, the fact that with your EAS is not in compliance, what have you. You know, these things all need to be reported and make sure that they're reported through the proper channels. Making sure that the issues are documented. Your operators should know how to document, you know, the base of what you need them to document. In a way of EAS, you know, whether you're using a service like ours, you know, to take care of your EAS, with our service, we actually set up a portal, it's a secure one, so the client can log in and see it for themselves, exactly what we're doing. So, you know, there's no hidden agenda there, you know, oh, I will get to it, we'll get it. No, it's done very structured on Monday at this time, you know, blah, 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 every week. But to make sure that things like that are documented. Like I said, a point of contact between technical staff and management, whether that be the contract engineer that you call in to take care of your problem, the contract firm, you know, whoever it is, it's, you know, you get to be the go-between. So hopefully you know how to speak to your management to get them to understand, hey, you know, we really do need to call the factory in here. Hey, you know, these guys said it will be fixed in 5 minutes, whatever. But sometimes it's a little hard for the business end of the operation to understand if you're talking technical terms. Once again, be the liaison to try and, you know, smooth that water between the tech guys talking all technical, the business side going, huh? You know, be the go-between for that so that you know what's going on. Chief operator should be responding to emergencies. What constitutes an emergency at a station? Anything, really. An emergency at a station could be the transmitter's not operating properly, or we're getting a lot of reports that we can't be heard, or, you know, hey, these funny red lights are lit up that I've never seen before. You know, things like that. But think of some other emergencies and things that humanity's had to deal with a lot lately. What if you've got a DJ for a radio station that said something on the air that really offended somebody, and someone shows up with a shotgun at the station? Yes, I have lived through that, by the way, except it was an assault rifle. But, you know, is that an emergency? Hell yes, it's an emergency. Do you need to come in for that? Yeah, somebody needs to come in and be the traffic cop between law enforcement, EMA, whoever's involved, and people at that station or pinned in the station or what have you. Somebody's got to be that go-between. So yeah, that's a big emergency. You know, hey, we're out of coffee in the break room. Not so much. To some, that may be an emergency, but to me, it would be if it ran out of Mountain Dew. Once again, violations of FCC regulations. You know, make sure that the station is operating legally. If you don't know, ask or research. It's all laid out in the CFR, Part 73 and 74, Code 47. It's all laid out on everything and anything with radio and television. But it's also very dry reading from somebody that's read it for the last 40-some years. And it can also be very confusing. As with any type of legal document, it'll say, well, you do one thing here, and then 2 pages later it says you do this, and you're trying to figure out which one's right, what's wrong. That's where, once again, you get somebody involved that knows, somebody that understands it, somebody that can advise you properly. Don't take a guess. Well, I think it should be this way. You know, I see Jim's here today. I'm sure Jim's had that plenty of times over the years where people just take the dart and throw it and say, yeah, that's what we're doing today. And he's nodding his head yes. I mean, you know, it happens. But that's where you ask the guys that you consult, that do your consulting, that do your contract, that do whatever. That's where you talk to these tech people to find out, hey, what does this really mean? You know, you need to understand. Once again, chief operator is not required to repair equipment. Chief operator responsibility is to notify the chief engineer or station management that there's an issue. Once again, it doesn't have to be a technical person, but it does need to be somebody who knows the technical person or the technical person to call, or hey, station management, you got a problem. It's the person that recognizes the problem. It's the start of the process. So chief operator is a very, very important position. Unfortunately, a lot of stations have, kind of pushed that away a little bit and pushed it off on their new DJ or whatever. And that may not be the best person to have. But once again, get with your engineering firm, get with your contract engineer, your chief engineer, what have you, to make sure that you're being covered. And I always put this as an ending, safety first. Like I said, I'm very passionate about safety. I want people to stay safe. I want people to go home for whatever their life outside of radio and TV. They enjoy flying their planes, they enjoy, running their dog rescue, whatever it is. Well, I want you folks to be able to do that. So, safety is very paramount. So, any other questions or any questions?
I'd like to bring up something about the cameras.
Yeah, Caleb.
Not really a question, but just, so, since they've come down in price so much and are free, we have, wireless links to all of our sites, what I do is I take one camera and point it up at the tower.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I get in the morning, when it's dark out, it's a publicly viewable spot. Not everyone can get in there, but it's pretty easy to pull up the cameras and take a look at the cameras, make sure tower looks good.
That's great. I mean,
What I should do then is to document that I did that.
yeah.
No,
Yeah, because
or have the overnight guy document that.
yeah, because it says there needs to be a visual that, yeah, somebody looks at tower lights and yeah, they're on.
Yeah.
It says visual. It doesn't say how that visual was obtained. No, I think that's a good idea, having a camera, and like Caleb said, and we was talking about earlier, the price of the cameras have come down immensely with some of these security systems. And something like that doesn't need to be, the high-end, best quality camera. It needs to be able to point up there and say, yeah, I can tell the light's on, or hey, that's dark.
And if you're doing an NVR, either in the cloud or on your own computer, like if I get an alarm saying the tower light's not on, I can then go back and check and see when did it go off.
Well, and even more importantly than that, you can go in and first and see, is the alarm telling the truth or is it lying?
Yep, exactly. I do that.
Not to say that any remote control has never had an issue with reporting something false, but no, that's a good use for the cameras we were talking about. Yo.
Yeah, let's talk a minute about with the changes to the main studio rule being eliminated. And you mentioned control points. Nowadays, modern technology, control points everywhere in the world. How do you, we always use the reference back to control points. You mentioned that earlier.
There's still a legal location listed. What location is listed with the FCC is the main point for that station.
What if it's not in there?
That is another issue.
No, that's the modern operation.
I know, but I mean, that falls under another issue. The fact of the control point, what's the first part.
The transmitter is operating under automatic rule. If you have a 3-minute correction in the circuit itself, you need to call back to remote control if you can't handle that.
Right.
If you're under automatic, you do not have to have control.
Right, but, for the listed control point, it can fall back to whatever's on file with the FCC for that main address of the station. Then if anything's designated from there separately, that's another issue. As to the point where there's nobody there, I didn't brush up on that side of the rules real well. I know it's changed around, but there's something in there about, Chuck, you might know this one, how many hours a week somebody's got to be at the main control to answer the phone, or it's changed around. But there is something in there about at this legal location. Yeah, it can be. Like I say, whatever's on file with the FCC.
That brings up another question. Did I hear right that you've got to have a copy locally
If a copy locally of the public file, no, I don't think so, not since the online. Not since the online. They're just saying a local copy of that chief operator form in files at the station. No, that's all right, Paul. If you had the travel day I've had, I totally understand.
John, as far as forward, do the pilot injection and modulation levels fall under chief operator? I know that used to be at one time a lot of stores a huge deal, but I think that's much more since everything's done away.
Well, since it's technically illegal operating parameter, yes, it does. Does anybody check them anymore? No. Because it's not required to check, it's required that you are operating within whatever parameter. And if you're confident enough with your equipment, keeping you at that 9% pilot level or whatever, that's fine. As long as when Mr. Inspector comes in and says, yeah, you're operating at a 20% injection level on your pilot, you got a problem. Well, I checked it in 1987. Yeah, they don't care when you check it. All they care about is that it is or is not in compliance. So once again, especially with the newer transmitter, the newer exciters and stuff, it's going to be a pretty sure bet that it's set properly and it maintains there unless there's total failure. But for the folks that have the older systems, or you have, let's say your transmitter shack is out in the middle of nowhere and you've had trouble because you're in Ohio and it gets cold in the winter and you've had temperature variation problems because your HVAC at the tower site is not the best, so it's causing swings in your injection levels. It's causing swings in the power levels. Had a transmitter I worked on one time. We couldn't get it back up after I got a blower replaced in it. We couldn't get it back up above 55% power for a couple of days because it was the middle of winter, remote transmitter site, concrete building, without the heat of the tube transmitter running in there. That was the heat for the building. There was basically no heat in the building, so all the metal in the transmitter, expansion, contraction, know where this is going. So it meant that we operated at this stage of power once we got it going, so we got warmed up a little bit, then we bumped it up, then we retuned, bumped it up, several times over a couple of days of adjusting and bumping the transmitter to get it back up to full power. It wasn't a fault of the transmitter. It really wasn't a fault of the building's design because when that transmitter ran, the building was quite comfortable. And it did a very ample job of heating the building even on the coldest of days. So once again, it depends on your operation and your setup. Anything else, folks? Or did I confuse everybody? I'm hoping I didn't confuse you. Once again, I apologize for my tardiness. Thanks some of the traveling in Columbus area, but I appreciate your time. I appreciate the turnout, and I'm also on the program committee. And I love that I saw so many people when I got here coming for the 2 days of this. So thank you very much.